Welcome back to Insights Now. I'm Gabriela Santos, Chief Market Strategist for the Americas here at JP Morgan Asset Management. And this season, we're doing things a little differently. I will be the host, and Dr. David Kelly will be in the hot seat. So far, this U.S. election cycle has been nothing short of turbulent and a looming source of volatility for much of this year. With the summer now behind us and November quickly approaching, investors should more seriously consider the implications of the upcoming election and the opportunities and risks that may arise from it. That's why, for the 11th season of Insights Now, entitled The Policy and Investment Implications of the U.S. Election, David and I will discuss topics at the forefront of this election season and explore the impacts that proposed policies could have on the markets and the economy. We'll cover a range of topics from immigration and tariffs to taxes and Fed independence. So tune in to stay informed on what could drive volatility heading into November and how you can better prepare your portfolio for a post-election world. Over the past year and a half, surging immigration has helped boost labor supply at a time when U.S. demographic trends were sluggish and recession fears were elevated, providing a nice tailwind for the labor market and the economy. At the same time, immigration has caused significant stress for migrants and the communities that they arrive in, making the issue one of the most politically sensitive topics this election season. So for our conversation, we'll focus on the magnitude of the recent immigration surge, discuss how long it can continue, and crucially explore what it might mean for the economy and corporate profits moving forward. So to help us dive deeper into all of this, I'm excited to be joined by our usual host of the show, Dr. David Kelly, our Chief Global Strategist here at JP Morgan Asset Management. Now, let's get started. David, welcome to Insights Now.
Very glad to be here.
David, before we get too deep in the weeds, let's try to contextualize and put some numbers around this recent immigration surge. Exactly how large has it been? Do we have any parallels here?
Well, not in recent history. The U.S. has always been a nation of immigrants. The U.S. has had net immigration in almost every year that we can have good records on. But it has been significant relative to what we saw in the last decade. So you could look at some official data. You could look at net immigration as calculated by the Census Bureau, and that's risen from about 800,000 people per year from, say, 2016 to 2019, up to 1.1 million last year, and we think probably 1.2 million in this year, and we're looking at the year that ended on June 30th in the terms of those numbers. So a significant increase, but not enormous. And equally, if you look at visa applications at foreign embassies, they've gone from about 500,000 per year up to 600,000. But we think that both those numbers really underestimate what's going on. Because what we've seen is a massive increase in border encounters at the southern border. And in fact, if you look at encounters between immigrants and officials from the Immigration Naturalization Service or Border Patrol, they've gone from about 700 to 800,000 per year, again, in the 4 or 5 years before the pandemic, up to over 3 million last year and probably over 3 million this fiscal year also. So just a massive increase in the number of encounters, fourfold increase. And another bead that we have on this is if we look at, what happens when you cross the border outside the normal border stops. Well, if you surrender to Border Patrol, you are entitled, if you wish, to apply for asylum, and they actually have to adjudicate your case. But what we've seen is once you've been in this country for 6 months, you are entitled to work. You're not entitled to Medicaid, and you're not entitled to food stamps. So you've got a great incentive to work, basically. You work or you starve. But if you look at the number of approved applications for employment, those are running at about 1 million a year again, between 2016 and 2019. We hit an all-time record high of 1.2 million in fiscal year 2022. And that was completely eclipsed by another all-time record of over 2 million in fiscal 2023. And we think that, and the fiscal year ends on September 30, we think we may be in the order of 2.5 million approved applications just in the last fiscal year when we get the numbers for in the year that ends in this September. So we've seen an enormous increase in people coming to this country and signing up to work in the last few years. And I think it'll take a while for the Census Bureau to rectify some of their other numbers to truly reflect what has been a massive immigration surge.
And David, how do we see this immigration surge in the labor market data? Do you think that's fully accounting for it? And overall, how do you think it's impacted the labor market?
No, I think that it has had profound effects on the labour market, but I think it's very important to separate what it's doing to the labour market data and what's actually doing to the labour market, because there are a lot of problems. So in the household survey, they do a survey of households, about 60,000 households every month, and they ask people about, are you working, are you looking for a job? But they then hook that on to their estimate of the population of different age groups. And the Census Bureau has been estimating a very slow growth in that overall US population, despite the growth in immigration, and they really have not fully captured that. And so if you look at employment as measured by the household survey, it's grown very slowly, in fact, over the last few years. Despite what we know is actually very rapid growth in employment overall, despite this surge in immigrants. If you look at the payroll survey, it had shown a lot more growth, and we just saw a benchmark revision which pulled the number down by about 800,000 for the latest year. It's still showing more growth, and I still think it's underestimating growth, because those numbers are based on people who apply to be part of the unemployment insurance system. And first of all, people who are here but have not got any legal right to work, they may well be working. They probably are in many cases, but they're not going to sign up for the unemployment insurance system. And even after they've got that authorization for employment, they may still get missed by those numbers. So it may be that the payroll survey is missing this. I think the household survey is certainly missing this. We're seeing, I think, more growth in jobs in the real world than is in the government data. But even with that, one of the remarkable statistics in the household survey is that over the last 3 years, most of the job growth that has occurred in the United States has come from people who were not born in this country. Because what's really going on is the population age 18 to 64, in terms of the native-born population, it's stagnating, because so many baby boomers are hitting 65 and retiring and moving out of the workforce. We wouldn't have any real job growth at all, or of any significance, if it weren't for immigrant labour coming into this country and pushing up those numbers. So it is having a profound effect on the economy, both in increasing labour supply and also filling a lot of gaps that we had before, after the pandemic, particularly among low-skilled workers.
And speaking of aspects of the labour market that have been filled by this recent immigration surge, can we tell by sector, by subsector?
We can make a pretty good guess. I mean, if you look at if you go back to March of 2022, we had 12 million job openings. Now we're down to 3 million job openings. Back then, we didn't have enough workers for any of these sectors. But today, the number of job openings in construction is actually below where it was in 2019. The number of job openings in retail is also below where it was in 2019. I suspect that those jobs are being filled. I know that a lot of jobs in leisure and hospitality are being filled. I suspect that a lot of daycare jobs are also being filled. Things like landscaping. The reality is a lot of this is low-wage workers. But we think that particularly the gaps that we had in low-wage, relatively low-skilled workers, where language abilities are not as important, or knowing English well is not as important, we think that is very much where the immigrant surge has filled jobs.
And do you think this is behind some of the recent moderation that we've seen in overall wage growth?
Yes, I do. And I think it's for two reasons. First of all, literally, there is a mix shift. Because if you fill all those low-wage jobs, the average hourly earnings gets pulled down. But also the competition. I mean, what we're seeing is, for example, over the last year, overall wage growth is only up 3.6% year over year for all workers. And it was up 6% year over year at its peak. So it's come down a lot as this immigration surge has occurred. But also within that, retail wage growth is only up 2% year over year. And what that tells me is it's not just that they're filling the jobs. The fact that they are there willing to work means that American employers don't have to pony up higher wages in order to attract labor. And so businesses are getting tougher on this. They're not giving wage increases in huge amounts. The quits ratio has actually fallen below where it was in 2019. So fewer people are quitting. They don't feel they've got the bargaining power. And one of the reasons particularly low-wage workers feel like they don't have the bargaining power is that if they make a big deal out of it, there is somebody else, and very often an immigrant, who's willing to work for that money.
That's really interesting in the sense that it's been supporting the disinflationary process, unintentionally, of course. Oftentimes when I speak to certain investors, the question is actually, has immigration been boosting inflation in other aspects? Are there certain prices you see as being pushed up?
As a macroeconomic issue, generally no. And the reason is this. The majority of people, the vast majority of people who immigrate are immigrating to work. There are, of course, plenty of families as well as single individuals, but the largest number of immigrants is single individuals. And they're of working age. They're usually in their teens or 20s, and they're coming to work. And so that gives you extra supply in the economy immediately. But they don't have any money, or they've got very little money. And so the actual extra demand on the economy in terms of, the basic food items, there's going to be some increased demand. Clothing, there's going to be some increased demand. Some sort of shelter, yes. But even there, I mean, people who come to be realistic, people who are coming to work in a low-wage job, they're not going to be big participants in the home ownership market, not for a while. Now, over time, the great story of America is how immigrants become successful over time and are actually a big, they'll be contributing to demand in the future. But generally, when you have a big wave of immigration, you get more supply rather than demand for consumer goods. More supply of work than demand for housing. And so generally, this is not pushing up inflation.
That's really interesting. Another question that we often get, and personally I'm curious to hear about, is, as you mentioned, a lot of these immigrants are here to work. They're clearly applying for permission to work, are impacting the labor force. But has there been any impact in terms of the fiscal deficit, in terms of support measures for these arriving immigrants?
There is some strain, obviously, on cities and state and local governments. And I think you can see that particularly, as immigrants got bussed up from Texas in particular to some northern cities, you can see these northern cities are having some real problems in terms of where do we put these people? How can we support these people? And it is a strain on local budgets. So I think that's one element of it. I think it's a strain on state budgets, a strain on city budgets. On the federal side, there is some increased spending over time as people become have more rights in the system. Once they have, for example, got legal status, their asylum hearing has been held and they are entitled to be here. Then they become eligible for things like Medicaid and food stamps if they fall in a tough time. So there is some element of that. There will over time be a further strain in educational systems, but again, that's more on the state and local level. Actually, at the federal level, the odd thing is, it looks like immigration actually is a net positive for the budget at the federal level. I'm not sure the state and local level, but at the federal level, the Congressional Budget Office has actually done some estimates about this because they have identified this immigration surge as being a significant driver in the economy. And what they said is, the deficit is getting worse, will be getting significantly worse over the next decade, but it would have gotten worse still had it not been for the immigration surge that they're putting in here. Because what's happening is as these people become integrated into the economy, they're paying taxes, sales taxes, but also income taxes, FICA and so forth, and that's money going in. And again, they're obviously they don't really have much of an impact on defense spending. They will have some impact, dealing with the immigration surge has some impact on spending at the border. But defense spending, things like Medicare and so forth, they're generally younger than that. And programs for very young children, again, they're mostly working age. So generally speaking, I think this has been seen by many studies over time, a wave of immigration. And let me be clear, I'm not in any way justifying the chaos really that has been at the U.S. border for a number of years, which is, by the way, getting a little better now, but it has been really chaotic. I'm not defending that, but I am saying that as a matter of economics, it does tend to actually help the federal budget a bit. Now, it needs all the help it can get because we're running significant deficits. The debt to GDP ratio is rising. But from a federal government perspective, it's probably a net benefit for the budget, not a net cost.
And for us, for our purposes here, we're very much focused on the dispassionate economic and deficit implications. But certainly it's very much inflaming tensions, emotions, and it's a key election topic.
Yep.
How do you think immigration policy might or might not change after?
We haven't had a major piece of legislation on immigration, I think, since the Reagan administration. And one of the problems that both the Biden administration and the Trump administration have confronted is the law actually says that if you are in place in the United States, if you actually manage to get into the United States, you're entitled to apply for asylum right there. And that's what the law says. And both administrations have actually struggled with, well, how can I, by executive order, stop the surge of people in the getting across into the United States? Or how can I return them to a country of origin or some third-party country while dealing with this issue? The law really is not kept up to date with the reality on the ground. But we really need a bipartisan immigration reform bill. I actually don't think there's that much difference between how the average Republican voter, the average Democratic voter sees this. I think they realize the benefits of immigration in the long run, but also the need to have an orderly system, both to benefit the immigrants themselves, but also to benefit everybody else. And so I think there's a tremendous appetite for a comprehensive immigration reform bill. And I think we probably will get that after the election, depending on how the election goes. I mean, it's probably going to be a tight election, and we'll talk about that some more. But there is a strong bipartisan feeling, at least among voters, that reform is badly needed here to, recognizing the benefits of immigration in the long run, but also needing an orderly situation that helps the economy and rather than a disorderly situation. I think we could get that after this election when we perhaps political passions have cooled a bit.
And we talked a little bit about the implications in terms of the economy. In terms of corporate America, thinking about the reality on the ground and how it might hopefully be addressed later. How do you think this recent immigration surge has been impacting corporate profits? Is this a net positive for companies, for investors?
Yeah, no, absolutely it's a net positive because it's done two very important things for companies. First of all, it has given them the workers they needed. And so it's been easier to find workers to literally grow their businesses. And also it has helped bring down wage growth. And that helps them, because it means that when they negotiate wages with their individual workers, they don't have to be quite as generous because there's somebody else who might be willing to work for that. So that's been very positive for corporate profits, not so great for low-wage workers. But also, we had an economy which had a very tight labour market back in 2022. And in some ways, this immigration surge occurred just in the nick of time because it allowed wage growth to come down. And wage growth was really could have contributed to stronger overall inflation. And right now, the Federal Reserve is getting ready to cut interest rates. They would not be in a position to get ready to cut interest rates had it not been from the immigration surge, which has pulled down wages and therefore is pulling down the rate of inflation in the service sector.
So something that's very much helped to stabilize or even improve margins after such a tough period when wage costs were rising.
It's just one more example of America doing things in a rather chaotic way and ending up benefiting from free market forces.
One last question, David. You alluded to monetary policy, to the Fed. Do you think they change policy based on what's happening with immigration or not? Are they counting on this continuing?
No, I think they'll be a little bit more short-term focused on, well, let's see how the economy plays out. I mean, I think it's still a very competitive economy. I think with or without a further immigration surge, I think we've got enough balance in the labour market right now that we're not going to see a renewed surge in wage growth. If we don't see that, I think the Federal Reserve can moderate or can gradually bring rates down. But I do think that over time we will see a moderation in the surge. I think we'll look back historically and say, okay, this was an unusual period at the start of the 2020s where we saw this surge in immigration after the pandemic. I think either through legislation or through executive action, I think that the surge will diminish over time and we'll be back to a sort of slower growing economy. And generally as you move towards a slower growing economy, unless some other shock hits us, I think that we can get back to more normal interest rates and hopefully stable, relatively non-inflationary growth. I think that's the direction we're headed in. And to some extent, thanks to the immigration surge to this point, but we don't need a further immigration surge to keep this going.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. And such a tough topic to discuss, one with a lot of emotions, a lot of opinions. I think it's been super helpful to be able to just look at it from a pure economic markets policy standpoint.
Well, happy to be here.
On our next episode, David and I will be discussing another hot topic, geopolitics, honing in on trade and tariffs. And until then, check out our Election Insights Hub at jpmorgan.com/elections for more timely election content. To all our viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in today and speak to you soon.